All right, so I wanted to make a quick post just kind of showing off a little bit of what I did for a reproduction World War II Soviet mask. So a lot of Soviet reenactors, obviously they'll know one of the most important parts of their kit is the gas mask bag, and there's many different ways that you can actually use it, either as a bread bag or you can actually hold a gas mask in it. And I've seen a lot of reenactors, mostly they'll use it as a bread bag, which is totally fine. Historically, that was done. Some will actually have a mask inside the bag as well. Usually it's a post-war mask, like a post-war Polish or Soviet mask, or like a GP5 with a hose and a canister, just like as a bag filler. This is kind of more if you want to put a little bit more detail in your gas mask kit. This is going to provide you some tips that I've actually done here, as well as understanding components and the differences between wartime and post-war. So what I did here is, what I have here, this is a modified Polish post-war mask that I've turned into something that looks like a wartime SHM41 slash mock-up SHM1. Now, there were two types of protective masks that the Soviets were using during the war. That was the Mod 08, as well as the SHM1. Now, you really can't reproduce feasibly a Mod 08 just because of how it's constructed, unless you were to actually figure out how to mold a face piece. The SHM1 is probably going to be the easiest mask to reproduce. Now, for a lot of reenactors, they're not wanting to get originals. Obviously, if you're doing more than just living history and actually going out to reenactment battles, you don't want an original item on your kit, because anything can happen. You can damage an original mask pretty easily. As well as an original canister, both of which are very expensive to replace if you were to do that. So an alternative would be to make as close of a copy as a reproduction as you can, which is what I've done here. So what makes up this face piece is a Polish SZM 41M. I just wanted to mention also that you don't necessarily have to use an SCM 41M face piece. You can use like a post-war SHM 41 and just paint that up to be a wartime mask. I just did it for my example, but there's a plethora of other SHM style face pieces that you can use. I took out the original valve box, which you can see down there, and I've put an SHM 41 style valve box from a bad condition SHM 41 that I had. Now, the reason I chose this face piece for this project was because the Polish rubber that they were using in the 70s is very similar to the rubber that the Soviets were using in World War II, just color-wise. It has that more cream white color. So here's an SHM1 face piece I have. I took it apart because
it was torn.
And I actually used some of the parts for another project that I had. But you can see the rubber is very similar in quality and color. Now, there's a lot of variations in rubber that the Soviets were using during World War II. You had this more common white rubber, but there was also bluish gray rubber that was used. And so going back to the construction, what I did was I took that Polish hardware, and as you can see, I closely matched as much as possible to that Soviet gray that they were using on a lot of their mask hardware, as well as a few other things. But there's a lot of color variation you can do with this if you were to go out and do this yourself. You can use like a mustard brown color, very similar to what the post-war paint that they were using. There's like a hunter green color, dark brown, light gray, dark gray, this bluish gray that you see here, light blue. So I would implore you to go, if you're going to do this, go out and try to find a picture of an original mask and base it as closely off of that as possible. What I have here is an original SHM1, obviously still together. This is probably one of the more common configurations you'll find. So it has like this dark gray valve housing. Sometimes this comes in, this bluish gray, so on and so forth. Most commonly, the lens frames will be this. I don't know if this is bare metal. This is some sort of treated steel. So they have this gray appearance. You can easily get a flat gray and just paint post-war eye lenses. This is most common. You also see brown lens frames, sometimes that bluish color that I did on mine, and green as well. This is an original set of green lens frames I got off of that parts mask over there. And if it'll focus, you can actually see they came off the same mask, but they're actually two different shades of green. But, you know, this is something you can do as well. Valve housings came in this color too. So when you take apart your post-war mask, you're going to get, you know, the lens assembly is what I'm going to call this. So you'll get a glass lens with a rubber O-ring, the anti-fog retainer, and then the anti-fog retainer ring. And it just kind of sits, so these two pieces sit inside of the opening, just like this, if you can imagine it. And then of course your anti-fog ring goes inside of that to, you know, to hold in the anti-fog lens. This is optional if you were to get it and take it apart. This is totally optional to put back in because SHM1s prior to around 1941 did not have this. As a matter of fact, my example totally lacks that assembly, and it just has the bare glass lens. So you do not need to put this in your example. Now, if you wanted to, it is imperative that you match it, you color match it to whatever you choose your lens frames to be. Otherwise, it just won't look right. Honestly, the most important thing is to not have this galvanized steel look on your mask. In my opinion, just because it kind of gives it away. Oh, you know, you use post-war parts. And then on the glass, this O-ring, whether you know have this or you don't, you want to remove this rubber O-ring because the wartime mask did not have that. And you know, I've seen plenty of reproductions of people attempting to use like a GP5 or something, and this just totally ruins it for me because it's so noticeable on the mask. You just see a white ring with, like, you know, the painted metal parts. And then if you want to go for authenticity, you really want to stress getting the early style valve housing that does not stick out as far as the post-war SHM41M style valve housings, and you don't want to use something at, you know, the valve housing out of a GP5 even. Now, if you choose to do so, that's your business. I chose to do it for mine. Again, if you don't do it, it's not the end of the world. But if you want something a little bit more authentic, then you're going to want to try to find something like this. And they can be found, you know, with SHM41s, Polish SCM41s, early type. So if you want something more accurate, that's what you're going to have to do. And then you can see I left the original paint on the threads, but I just painted over it with that gray color, the grayish blue color. Now for the cloth tape, I used hockey tape. There's a lot of variation with wartime Soviet tape color. You had gray, you had dark gray, I think even dark brown, cream, white, beige. So again, look for an original photograph and try to closely copy that. First of all, when you put the valve housing back in, this is actually wired underneath. I'll put a picture of that up. And then you would go over it with tape. And you also need tape for under the lens frames as well. And then you can see on the inside, I color matched the anti-fog retainers. Now for hoses, wartime hoses are relatively hard to come by. This one I believe is wartime. I'm not so sure. I know this one for a fact is wartime. And the main thing you want to take away from this is that wartime hoses have painted threads. So you can very easily get a post-war. I would recommend the post-war Polish rubber hose from like the 70s. And then just paint the threads this, you know, mustard brown color, green, gray. So like, again, this bare metal gray is totally fine as well. So you have some variation there. Black, you can also paint it black even. And again, you can use cloth or stockinette covered or just bare rubber. Now these are the two main canisters that were being used during the war. Really, I'm just going to focus on this one because there is no post-war equivalent to the MT4 canister. Now, there were other canisters as well, like the T5, the TCH, the L1, L2, L3, then of course the MT4 and the MO2 canister. This is the MO2 canister. The EO12, MO4, and the EO14 canister is probably the closest post-war equivalent you're going to find. The Polish actually copy this canister as their own MO2 canister. So did the Hungarians. So you could probably find one of those and it'll be pretty close. You can also find post-war MO2 canisters. Sometimes they pop up, but you know, you can get away with those other post-war canisters. So that about wraps it up. I'm not going to get into the kit items or the carriers because that's a whole other ordeal. And most of the time, reenactors know about like the different types of carriers that were used You had your OBR 36, the OBR 39, OBR 41, and then all the carriers in between that and earlier. So I'm not even going to bother getting into all that. I am going to make a separate post about the actual full kit, but that'll come later. So those are my tips for the reproduction wartime mask. If you have any questions, please let me know, but I hope this helped you. It's actually, and I just want to note that this is all fairly cheap to accomplish. SHM41s are fairly common, especially in bad condition. Polish post-war masks are fairly common. And post-war parts, you can steal parts off of any post-war SHM style mask, and they're all interchangeable. So it's it's a very simple, very cheap hoses are easy to find, and maybe like $10 worth of hobby paint, and you can have a decent wartime style mask for your reenactment gas mask kit.